someone who normally comes here and eats lunch with us. We started these webinars from something that we used to do called Lunch and Learn, and then we realized that there's so many people out there who wanted to join us, but they couldn't sit in our little Red Ribbon Cafe, that we started doing the webinars. But Eddie Lombard is out there, and we thank him for being with us. He is a trust counselor and has always been one of our biggest supporters and takes the messages to kids. So Eddie, welcome to your first webinar. We miss you here in the lunchroom, but you probably sort of feel at home here. I'm going to introduce you to two interesting young men, one younger and then one even younger, and then I'm of course anchoring that spot between all of this. We're talking about social norming, parenting, the power of parents, big topics. And then Markham, Cronin, who is the founder of and president of Markham Unlimited, is a branding expert, and he's working with us, and he has been at the head of some of the most influential campaigns around the truth campaigns, which definitely changed behaviors. So we are thrilled to have Markham here, and he said, as we're getting all set up, that this reminded him of the little PTA newscast, and he's right. That's what we are. We're just moms and dads and broadcasting, trying to give you the latest, best information. And of course, his role is to make us be spiffier. But if we're too spiffy, then we don't identify with you. So we're sort of reality, but welcome, Mark. I'm glad you're here. And then we have someone even younger. We have Richard Dimarco Barea, who is, he is really a high-tech entrepreneur. He does all kinds of interesting things in his agency where he is teaching us, and hopefully will teach us even more, how to reach out to you with content marketing that you want, which is always an interesting challenge because we have things we want to tell you, but you only hear the things you want to hear. So we are thrilled that he is here, and his dad is on our board of directors. So if you know, maybe your dad's watching.
Maybe, hopefully.
Maybe, hopefully.
I should tweet him. Let me tweet him and see if he's in.
Oh, see, he's into this tweeting. He'll tweet and all this stuff. So
thank you for having me, Peggy.
Thank you for being here. This is going to be, and Amy is a little nervous because normally we have some PhDs on here and they just tell you what the research is. These are real world people. Richard, as a matter of fact, is a DJ over on Miami Beach. So if you really want to hear what's going on with your kids and on Miami Beach, Richard could sort of tell you that. Why? Why do we want to harness parent power? This was something we worked on yesterday because we had a great little presentation, and Richard said to us, well, but why? And why do we want to harness parent power is to raise healthy, drug-free children, to launch responsible, productive members of society, to have a happy family. Who wouldn't like that? To have an engaging community family life. So those are the things that these gentlemen helped us define. So we hope we're going to do those for you. Understanding social norms. You want to talk about them?
Sure. I mean, I think that you know, we go about our daily lives, and there's a lot of things we take for granted. And as Peggy said in the very beginning, that we generally assume that other people see things the same exact way we do, and that our children, more importantly, see things exactly the same we do. And I think it's important for us very often to sort of detach ourselves from the things that we know and believe, and try and look at the world through our kids' eyes for a minute, because some of the things that they're exposed to every day are things that we don't even realize the extent to which influence them. Like, for example, social media, or you know, very often in these conversations we talk about, hey, well, when we were kids, we didn't have cell phones. Well, guess what? Our kids all do, and they're attached to them, and they are these little leashes that attach them to the world. You know, when our oldest son turned 18, we couldn't believe he didn't care about getting his driver's license, because when we were kids, we couldn't wait to drive. But then we realized, like, because of social media and cell phones and stuff, like, we had to drive so we could go out and hang out with our friends. Like, these kids are with their friends 24 hours a day online. So, you know, understanding a social norm is, part of that is understanding this other context and this other dynamic that our kids face. And then the attitudes that they face, whether it's in popular culture or in the movies, or with their friends at school or the places they hang out, where certain things are accepted. You know, like, it could be something as silly as like recycling. Like, all our kids are like, hey, don't be sure to put that bottle in the recycling bin. Like, and you're like, it can go in the trash. But like, kids, because their peer group is like, recycling is really important to them. Like, save the earth. Like, that's a social norm that has changed dramatically in the last 10 years.
It has. Look at, do the next slide. Oh, this is good. I'm sure I should read this because you don't even know what these things are. In the 50s, you had little circles that were virgin pin. We played outside. We rode bikes to friends' houses. We stayed at home. We had stay-at-home moms. A milkman. How many of you ever had a milkman? See, we had a little box outside. The milkman put the milk in the door.
Our milkman was named MacArthur, and we had to visit him in the Publix. In Publix, and we had to pick his product.
There was a milkman. There was a little
this
tin
was a
box
little
by the back
milkman.
door.
You had a milkman?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, we had milkman, and even I was from the country. We even had an egg person who delivered eggs.
Eggman.
Oh, a fear of nuclear war. This is, but now here's, talk about, now that was a reality, but listen to what we did there, and probably some of you don't know this. This is when I was in elementary school. We all got under our desk as that was going to save us. I mean, so that there's an idea of something that we were doing that we thought would help us that would have had no help at all. So parents in charge of the home. I want to keep that big one there. The parents were the authority. That was the 50s. Here are the 60s. You want to do that one on 60s? But
oh yeah, sure. So in the 1960s, it seems that the environment seemed to be promoting kids playing outside. There was the general war climate of Vietnam, and then as we progressed into the late 60s, children began to rebel, which kind of makes sense with the whole revolution and the hippie movement in the late 60s, and even the musical culture that had changed. And that not only created a cultural revolution from a musical and an individual perspective, but also from the sexual perspective. So there was a huge sexual revolution, more liberal stance on sex, monogamy was questioned, even orientation became a little bit more prominent as a topic to discuss. And it seems like drug use gained momentum during this period of expansion of mind state. And then we had civil rights. So there's a lot of good topics that I see up there.
Yeah, and they're all interwoven when you think about this and you say sexual revolution. Well, there's one big thing that we know when it said, the pill was discovered in the early 60s. By the late 60s, you were into a sexual revolution. So there's certain answers for some of these things, okay? And the 70s, okay, rampant drug use. It really had become the me decade. Microwave ovens, think about that. That's when we started getting those. The growing feminist movement. Personal computers were introduced. We probably didn't have one in the 70s, but they were being introduced. Bell bottoms, sideburns, and platform shoes. Hey guys, what's back? Platform shoes.
Well, and I think one thing that's not on there that's really important as we get to where we sit today is this is when I was a little kid, is when we first started to see like moms and dads both going to work, like the dual income household and like latchkey kids, and like all of a sudden not only were the parents not both there, and in the 60s just mom was there, and now like there's nobody home. Like the kids are starting to be in control.
In charge. So what happened in the 80s? We have the 80s here.
I love the 80s.
Oh, I love the 80s too. The Bee Gees, we like the Bee Gees. We're from Miami, we really like the Bee Gees. AIDS, all of a sudden we had the sexual revolution, then we had AIDS. It rocks us, as a shocker. Decline in drug use after years of increase due to and this is in the research, the parent movement. Cable television MTV, CNN. Remember when you first heard there was going to be news on 24/7? It's like, oh,
What are they going to talk about?
And they're still
There
making it up.
there can't be that much going on.
Yeah.
Right, video games, personal computing is definitely becoming a thing. And remember the fax machine. That's really interesting because we talk sometimes about the tipping point. You know, you hear, like I can remember the first time somebody told me about a fax machine, I'm saying, a what? A what? But by the time it reaches, I saw the number at 800, even that small. Then it becomes very accepted in society. And so all of these things tie back into epidemiology. Once a thought or a product or something becomes in use, there's a tipping point where it just spreads.
Is that what
Tipping point.
Tipping point.
Tipping point.
No, epidemiology?
Epidemiology. Epidemiology.
Like an epidemic.
Yeah, an epidemic. How did something like this happen? You know, and then the scientists have to go back and say, okay, like and I'm simplifying this. This is Peggy's version. There's definitely truth to it. The sexual revolution really does go back to the pill.
Okay.
So, but I don't want to get hung up on that. How about Beanie Babies? Whoever would have thought that everybody had to have a little Beanie Baby? And the Saturday morning cartoons, believe me, they were here before the 90s. Because my kids were watching it in this.
Yeah, well, and I think another thing that's not on here really is the 1990s is when like the internet really first started to become a thing, which is the end of the 1990s. But by then, it like really started to influence everything we did. And you know, the fax machine came and went because all of a sudden there was email. And
that's right.
Then, I mean, we have a fax machine in a box back in my office. Like it ran out of paper 12 years ago, and we never bought more.
It's true. It's true.
Actually, email came around. It's kind of like, why even waste the paper?
And
well, exactly. Exactly.
Okay. So
And technology had a huge jump in the 90s, you know?
Yeah.
So before the internet, for our AOL CDs that we used to get in the mail every 3 weeks with 10 hours, 20 hours, I remember having a little like watch. It's called a Gigapet. You guys remember those?
Yeah, the little virtual pet.
So you had to feed your little digital Gigapet. If not, he died. Do you remember that, Peggy?
I definitely don't remember that. But I remember the chia pot, you know, where they grow hair.
Okay, there you go. So natural pet. You have to nurture it.
I mean, so there are all these things. So what we want to say to you, we want you to think about doing an environmental scan. What are the social norms that are really going on in your child's world today? And just make yourself a little list of them, because they're all around you, but they're so around you that you don't see them until we'll get through this decade and somebody will put up a list and you'll go, yeah, that was true. So an environmental scan of what's going on in your child's world today. Just what do you think's going on in children's world today? And let's talk about, let's say, a 12-year-old, 13-year-old.
Markham, do you have
I have a pair of 13-year-olds. So
A pair. Oh.
I do. What's going on in their world? They live online. They're constantly. In fact, their first question when we're going to go anywhere is there going to be Wi-Fi? So they ingest an insane amount of content. Whether they don't watch that much TV, honestly, because they love YouTube and they love playing games online and they Skype with their friends, and so the digital appetite they have is, you know, enormous. They're exposed to a lot of stuff that we weren't exposed to until we were much older than they are. So, you know, whether it's music or movies or violence or sex, like they're 13 and they've kind of seen it, which is shocking and unfortunate, but in a lot of ways, because of their access to the media, like it's almost impossible to control. I mean, we're lucky, but I mean, they're smart kids, and they're, I think, much further along educationally, again, because of their access to knowledge. They know a lot more about the world than we did when we were 13. They're much more socially aware as far as, you know, stuff like recycling and global warming, and because these are, you know, I would call it politically correct, but, you know, the environmental context of the world today and the discussions we have is something that they're exposed to. They're not nearly as physically active as we were when we were kids, because honestly, we didn't have a computer or video games or all that stuff. We were outside running and playing and swimming, and so as parents, it's very important, and it's hard for us, you know, to control that, and we do enforce like unplugging because you have to. What else as far as social norms and context for a 13-year-old?
Let's go even then. Let's talk about some of the older teens, because, and you know, again, the parent and the child are in a dance about what the norm is. I've had some parents say to me, "Oh, well, my 16-year-old, well, they went to South Beach." And talk about, you know, I mean, I'm really thinking, what is a 16-year-old doing on South Beach? But as a DJ, I am sure you see children there who shouldn't be there in that age group.
I mean, I guess I fell into that group that you're talking about, because when I was 16 years old and I started DJing when I was in high school, things progressed very rapidly, and I actually got a lot of opportunities to DJ in clubs at 16, 17 years old. And legally at that time the age was 18, now it's 21, but I guess they let me in because I was working. My dad used to drive me to the club at 10 o'clock at night with my vinyl records, because back in the day, you know,
Vinyl records.
Back in the day you didn't have computers.
Really old.
Yes, I'm extremely old. No, it's I have an affinity to classicness, like vintage and vinyl. So he drops me off, I play my music, I see all of my friends around, because, you know, it is what it is, the rules get bent a little bit, and then my dad picked me up at 1:30 a.m. And I was involved in this context, this environment where, even though a lot of my friends were around and they were doing drugs and they were drinking, and some of my friends, not all my friends, I never felt the urge and the need to, because my father was there for me, and he took me there, and he asked me how it was going. He wasn't judgmental, he picked me up, he was really a supportive parent. And I don't see really that kind of parental involvement on South Beach nowadays with these younger kids. I don't. I just see them kind of hanging around and going here and there, and like they're like little adults. You know, little adults with without the proper mind state or maturity necessary to interact in that world.
I think that's exactly right. And you know, the thing that we see is when the children turn 12 and 13, they're pretty normal big adults, and we then tend to think they are, and we want to give them freedom. And listen, parenting during the teenage years is a difficult thing, but we have to keep remembering just what you said. The brain is not fully developed. That's the role of the parent, to be stepping in there. Okay, so your dad gave you the freedom to do that, but he's picking you up, he's talking to you, he's walking you all the way through it. So very different. So you see the list of social norms that we said are going on up there for kids today, but you all can tell us as we get into the question and answer things, ideas and things that we didn't. Well, certainly the cyberbullying, that's huge, but cyberbullying and suicide, those are two very big trends that we, well, you didn't have cyberbullying because we didn't have all the cyber...
Right. Well, and I think this is actually an important point, and it's something we deal with a lot in our house, which is, you know, kids, because they have the ability to go online and do all this stuff and explore, and they don't understand that things like privacy, and they don't understand, and they love the anonymity of the internet, and so they go onto each other's, you know, Instagram feed, and they leave funny jokes and stuff, and we're constantly trying to tell them, like, look, you got to be very careful about, you know, how you inhabit this online world, because it doesn't seem real, but it is real, and the stuff lives forever. So you need to be really careful. And I think that, you know, the world of the open internet and privacy is something that is really fundamental and top of mind for me as it pertains to my kids online.
And suicide, I will tell you that the rate of teenage suicide is way up, and that's very frightening. And so what is that? It's about a loss of purpose, a loss of meaning, because we're losing our communities. We don't have all those ties together. We can laugh about the way it used to be, but I think instead of laughing, you say, what were some of the good norms you take, and the other ones you leave. But certainly a good norm was that sense of community, or we used to say the nosy neighbor. The nosy neighbor was going to tell on a child to their parent before the child got home. So there was a sense of caring, even though it could be a little bit, maybe the nosy neighbor, but there are some things we can take from every decade that are probably good things, and other things we need to throw out. So norm shaping the kids today, what's our next? Oh, here, is this a norm? When I saw this in the newspaper, I couldn't believe it. Here's the guy coming out saying he's hungover, he's really feeling terrible. And so what does the wife say? Oh, well, you need some medical marijuana. You've got two things going on here. Think about that. How you deal with things. He's gone out, he's hungover, but I know this is, maybe we're not quite there yet, but this is what we were looking at. Oh, just have some medical marijuana.
And I think this goes back to your environmental skin and understanding the social norms, because when we were kids, there was a huge stigma attached to marijuana. It was a drug, it was illegal, it was bad. Unfortunately, our kids are growing up in a world where it's legal in a lot of places. So to them, like, that stigma has been removed.
It has.
So, how we manage that as parents, it's a delicate dance we have to do.
It is very.
Yeah. And I think more than anything, when we're really looking at doing an environmental scan, we need to look at all the factors, not just the social norms, but the general socioeconomic area that we're in, because where there's a rampart use of illicit drugs, you may find certain pockets, certain neighborhoods that are more tending towards marijuana, others tending more towards cocaine, others tending more towards like ecstasy or amphetamines like that. So it's really important to understand the context of where your children are in, what neighborhoods they're in, what their kids are talking about, what their friends are talking about. Because if you're having a conversation to your child, or to anyone for that matter, about why you should not do marijuana, but guess what? Their friends are talking and doing cocaine. Well, then it doesn't really help you at all to be a good parent and to deter them from using cocaine.
Mm-hmm.
Because so really need to understand what is affecting your child, and then targeting the communication towards that scope.
And now, one of the things that we know for sure, this is proven, your perception will drive your reality. If you perceive that something is not harmful, you will use it, you will do it. So, Markham, you've got younger eyes. So, perception versus reality. What does this say?
Okay, boy, I can't.
Oh, there we go.
There you go.
Great job, Sergio.
Okay.
So 12-year-olds, 1.7% of 12-year-olds used marijuana. Wow, that's a lot. We're up to 6%, 6.1% for 14 or 15-year-olds, which is more than I would have thought, and 14% for age 16 or 17. So 14 kids out of 100 have used it in the last month.
And just so you know that the average beginning age for drug use is 12.6.
Wow.
And they're 12 years old. And the other thing that's always been amazing to me, they're usually on drugs for 2 years before the parents recognize it. So that has a lot to do with denial, and because if you see something, you have to do something, right? But denial is a protective defense mechanism that you just don't want to see it. But 2 years, and of course 2 years is a very long time for a child to be using a drug. That's having
especially in a developmental stage.
In a developmental stage, absolutely. Not everyone is drinking. Can you do this one, Richard?
Sure. I mean, it's really funny because growing up in an environment in the 90s and even today where it's very hospitality driven in South Beach, the norm really is that you see people, they go out to a bar or a club. I'm gonna be honest, I think I see more people doing this in a club or in a bar than actually taking a drink. The general perception is that you go out to a bar, you go out to a club, and you go out and you have fun and you drink. It's not my norm, but it is what I hear people saying, and it's kind of like what the conversation is. However, the perception, as we're seeing with the data here, is not 100% true. I don't think everybody really is drinking, but everybody is talking about the fact that everybody drinks. I think I get that feedback from my experience with the environment.
Part of
Right.
the drinking thing has to do, we did a study at MIT after they'd had a suicide, and they were trying to decide how to frame the message for that group. And so, of course, they said, well, you're smart, which they all knew they were smart. And then, why do you drink? And that what came out was they wanted stories. Telling each other stories is a way we relate. I met such and so, and this, and so stories are frequently tied to drinking, and that's interesting what you say, that they're not all drinking, but the stories are there. So what's the next slide is perception of risk matters. Absolutely. If you believe something is harmful, you're less likely to do it. Past month, the binge drinking, risk of harm, 5 or more, binge drinking, let me define that. 5 or more drinks in a row. It's the idea of drinking to get drunk. So binge drinking, if they perceived it was harmful, that by again, the biggest factor is parent disapproval. So it goes, you're kind of coming back. Okay. You were just talking about this one surprised you. This is the most common starting point of
It
when
surprised me. Ages 12 or older. That 12-year-olds, that's 65%. Seems like a lot, marijuana, but I mean, it's not surprising that marijuana is the most prevalent common starting point, only because it's, it is so
Readily available.
Yeah, I mean, it's so prevalent. I mean, it's everywhere. So.
And that perception of harm now, it's medical marijuana, right? Medical, are there people out in California with the little signs dancing, this, come get your medical marijuana.
Right.
So that's a normalizing, that's a norm. It's becoming a norm. That's why that crazy cartoon, how far before somebody just says, instead of saying taking 2 aspirin, oh, well, you just need some medical marijuana. It's norming. This whole thing of all the information around us is designed to norm. It's designed to move us in certain directions.
Right.
Okay, so our role is to challenge incorrect perceptions. And let's talk about how you did that with the Truth Campaign.
The Truth Campaign, okay. I was part of a team that was contracted to do the Youth Anti-Smoking Campaign. This was in the late 90s. And at the time, okay, so it's the late 90s, youth anti-smoking was kind of a pretty common thing, and there was a common way to go about it. There was a playbook, which was to say, don't smoke, it'll rot your lungs, it'll give you cancer, it'll kill you, it's bad for you. And the statistics showed that we were just losing that battle. None of that resonated with kids. So we did a couple things. First, we looked at the research, and the research supported all the work that had been done. So we had to look at the research and say, well, what's wrong with how the research is being done? And what we quickly learned was that the research was fatally skewed because the people doing the research weren't kids. And what we quickly learned was the only people that kids would be honest with when they were answering the questions about research were other kids. So we had to go out and find college students and young-looking researchers to go interview the kids, so we got real data. And what we very quickly learned was everything that had been done before to keep kids from smoking only made smoking more attractive to kids, because these kids were looking for a way to rebel. And if smoking was bad for you, and smoking was a way to look more adult, and then they were taking control of their lives by doing it. They were going to show you, parents and people in charge, by smoking. They were going to be, they have, 16, 17, 12-year-olds, they have a natural rebellion against authority. And so, smoking was their way to stick it to the man, and they were really sticking it to themselves in the same way. So that's sort of where the whole Truth Campaign came about, was look, kids, we took that natural rebellion and pointed it in a different direction to show them, look, the tobacco industry is playing you guys for suckers. They're using this rebellion to make themselves rich and kill you at the same time by fooling you into thinking it's cool. And when the kids, and we actually used a lot of young people in our advertising, when they realized that they were just corporate patsies, like the whole thing spun almost instantly. And we saw in the 4 or 5 years after the Truth Campaign originally broke in 1998, double-digit drops in teenage smoking. And we gave them the tools to actually be little activists against the tobacco industry. But I think the key thing here is, the perception of smoking as cool and rebellious, versus the perception of rebelling against the people who are trying to control you, was really where the Truth Campaign spun around and started to work. And it's still running today. I mean, now 16 years later, longer. I can't even do the math. So I think that simply, we live in a world, here on our panel here, where we float on an ocean of research and an ocean of data. And I think one of the first things we have to do when we look at this data is first question the data. Because it's very comfortable to say, well, the research proves this, and I think we have to challenge ourselves to look at everything we learn and ask ourselves if we're asking the right questions.
And to not get locked into one thing. Because again, if your experience has been a certain thing, we tend to like to repeat that. I mean, that is human nature. It's what we do. One of the things that the Truth Campaign had was $54 million. So when you have $54 million, you have a lot of power, because now you can control messages. Today, the parent really is not controlling messages. It's being controlled elsewhere. But with the parent movement back in '78, early '80s, they didn't have a lot of dollars for advertising, etc. It was about networking, linking parents, getting them to do something. So a social norms campaign. There are some out there that go into the schools and they teach the kids these social norms. The most important person who could do that is the parent. So that's where we're saying tag your it.
That's right.
So again, if you're going to start to think about, you see your child's environment and you're not real thrilled about that environment, what is it that you want to do about it? You have to be real clear about this. And I keep talking to Markham about, we need actually an instrument that's like an environmental scan, because once you've seen that, then the next question becomes, what do I do next? Because you certainly don't want to go off the deep end carrying on about, you need a plan, and you need other parents to reinforce what you do, and you need to be thinking clearly and calm. One of the things I was saying to everyone yesterday was, you need to read, you need to research, you need to reflect. It needs to be your data, because the kids are going to go, nuh-uh, nuh-uh, nuh-uh. That's what they do. That's normal. If they went, oh, thank you so much, that is not normal. I mean, there's something going on there if they do that. The child is going to push against some of the things that you are stating, be it the smoking, be it the marijuana, be it the club. It's about that parenting and engaging them in open conversations. Why don't you say something about that, Richard, just thinking about that.
Okay, so my viewpoint with developing an open, engaging conversation with younger people is the same perception that I have of how to develop open and engaging conversations with adults. I think it's about coming in with a non-judgmental attitude, coming in with the point of view to just listen and learn. I was reading some statistics the other day that says that we learn 75%, humans, we learn 75% of the things that we accept into our basic knowledge by listening, yet on a day-to-day basis, as soon as we grow out of our teenage years, we only engage in 45% listening in conversations with individuals. So what happens is that it becomes too pushing my point of view, instead of asking questions first, listening to the other person, and then asking a further question to help them gain the natural positive solution that is already inside of their minds. Innately, everybody wants to pick the better option towards health, positivity, engagement. It's a lot easier to get people to that final decision by not telling them to get to it or not trying to prove it to them, but by asking questions to help them come to that conclusion on their own. Kind of like that movie Inception, right? Where somebody goes into the person's brain and plants an idea. And the idea just grows over time, and it just develops and buds and spreads because the individual made that idea their own. So I think it's just putting the idea of something in their head, making them critical thinkers, and having them reevaluate, question the research, question the way things are, and I think it'll grow positively.
I like that because one of the things that I was just reading recently is that we become this big debating society. The way that things are set up on TV, everything is about a debate. There's the pro side.
I disagree.
Yeah, exactly. No, and they talk over each other. Well, they don't hear, right? They don't. So it's a crazy thing. If we could win all this by debate, we'd already have won. That isn't it.
Well,
it's about.
And I think, as a parent, I think that's one of the biggest challenges is like, it's not a debate. Like, you're the parent. You have to be the boss. Like, engaging in a discussion is one thing. And engaging in a debate, like, you don't get to debate with your kids.
Absolutely.
Like, they don't get to debate. Like, and I want to be reasonable, but at the same time, you have to be in charge.
I love this one quote that I heard years ago, this is from a doctor, and he said, "Don't argue with a teenager because you will lose." I mean, they are just set up to debate. I mean, that's what those years are for them to push against you. So, but that doesn't mean you don't listen. It doesn't mean you don't, say all that, but then you need a calm, reassuring answer. I'll give you an example that Amy liked when I was talking about our daughters had gone, they'd gone off to college and then they came home and so they said, "Oh, well, we'll just come in whenever we want and blah, 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 blah." And my husband was so great on this when he said, "Oh, I don't think so." He said, "This is not a hotel." He said, "When Mom goes out or I go out, we tell each other where we're going, what we're going to do, what time we'll be back. That's called a family." And that's a little bit what you're saying. What are the rules for your family? And how you say that, and what was so interesting, because these girls definitely like to debate, that made sense to them. They couldn't, there was nothing to say. There's no argument. Try to come up with things that apply to you too. This is what it is, this is the way it is. And I find, they used to call my husband the tyrant. He was an airline captain. So again, in that cockpit, those are the rules. But it was very interesting, Amy, after our girls graduated from high school, the boys kept coming around to visit my husband. Kids want rules. Now, he listened to them. I mean, he'd listen to their craziness, and then he'd say, "No, I don't like, that's sort of dumb." I mean, he'd be honest with them. I think there's something missing there about that. Perfect parents don't exist. I mean, if we're looking for one, nobody has one. And also to say, "Well, I don't know, I'll get back to you." And they also, and I bet you were a master at this, they are going to ask you the tough questions when there's some crisis going on. The pot's boiling over, everything's going on. So this environmental scan and knowing what your rules are really important to be thinking about that when it's calm. So that you can say, "I can't discuss that with you. I'll get back to you." And here's one of the ones about, do express your disapproval. Be clear and calm. What can you say about that?
Actually, I would say this in a slightly different way. I mean, to me, this is about establishing boundaries. And you do your environmental scan and you communicate very clearly to your kids, okay, this is where the border lies between acceptable behavior and unacceptable behavior. And if you cross that border, there's going to be consequences. And they need to learn where those borders are. And those borders stretch as the kids get older, because clearly, like the difference between having a 12-year-old and what they're allowed to do and see and where they're allowed to go, and having a 17-year-old, they're different. But you need to teach your children where that boundary is, and that there's very real consequences. Because ultimately what you want to do is you want to ingrain that so deeply in them that so when they're out on their own and you're not there, with that boundary, it's grown into their psyche. So they have organically acquired the ability to see the difference between acceptable and unacceptable behavior.
And the consequences.
And the consequences.
Yeah. Do not give in to the pressure. What does it say? Only 4.3% of youth who perceive strong parental disapproval for trying marijuana once or twice actually did, compared to if you're silent. When you're silent, 31%. I've said this in many of our webinars. You get the worst results if you're too strict,
right?
And the other one is you say nothing. You have to decide what it is you want to reinforce. And we were talking about it. Major on the majors. Major on things that are going to really hurt your child, who have the potential to kill your child with the alcohol and the drugs and all of those things. Minor on the minor. Your child comes home with a mohawk haircut, bright orange. That's minor. It's embarrassing to you, but it is not going to kill the child. So let's go back one more to that.
What if they came home with the mohawk in red during Red Ribbon Week? Is that considered acceptable?
No, that would not be just acceptable, but I think that would be fabulous. That's a whole new trend. That's a whole new trend.
It's next year's contest for Red Ribbon.
It's next year's contest. And let me just tell you, the story that I said about the hair, it was a father here who's been involved with the foreign families forever. So he told the child, he thought he'd go to school and be embarrassed. And so that would be, of course, the kids thought the child was really awesome. So then he said, this is not acceptable. You've got to change it. This isn't going to work. So the kid says, okay, I understand. He drops him off at the barber shop the next day. And then he picks him up. And guess what he had then? A blue mohawk.
Oh.
He just changed the color. He wasn't clear enough, so he thought blue was a little better than red, So
the loophole.
Yeah, find the loophole. They will
Kids
always.
are geniuses.
They're geniuses. They are. Okay. Oh, don't let me forget. Do not tell all your personal stories to kids about what you did that was so terrible. That is not proven to be a good thing. Have you already done that?
No, I have not. I don't really have any stories.
Oh, okay.
You mean like trying to be a friend to your kid
Well,
before
no.
a parent?
When I was in college.
Yeah. Don't tell them all those bad stories that you did. And I wish I'd done it differently. They don't need to know all your bad stories.
Is there a social norm towards parents trying to skew towards, I want to be a friend to my child instead of a parent?
Oh my gosh,
And then
yes.
does that cause problems?
I think that causes huge problems, and I think we've had several really big experts in recently, and they've said in separate things, children are raising their parents today. That's scary. Think about that. Children are raising their parents. And we're talking about you need the parent to be the authority. Because remember, their little brains are not fully developed. However, they can, remember the commercial on TV where they could buy the telephone. Now, Mom and Dad, I'm sorry, you can't have that phone. This plan is not good for you. Remember that?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's got to be some truth. Okay, so they know more about technology, but they don't know more about life. You got to step in and be the expert on life. And so now if you're going to talk to them about the social norms, make this a little bigger so I can go through it all. You're starting with that individual, but you can't just stop there. You have to be talking to their friends. Like I said, now the friends kept coming back to see my husband. You've got to talk to those kids. They want to interrelate with you. And I think you said something that was right. We can go across all kinds of generations, and we're representing 3 different generations here. But we can talk, and we fight a little bit. We don't always agree. But we're learning. We're learning from each other. If you're always with people who agree with you, then that's not a good thing. That is definitely not a good thing. So different generations, different peers, talking about that, and now you've got to go to the school. You got to really already have a plan on how you're going to talk to the school about their policy. And I will tell you, I don't ever learn. I've learned that by going in to tell someone they're wrong never works. And I have a school principal sitting here. You really want to be on their side, and you want to be thinking about how together you're going to solve a problem. Because trying to tell somebody about if they only change something does not work. No. So go back to the public health model again. Bigger a little bit. The community. I mean, just think, well, what's going on right now in the community and in the policies is the marijuana thing. And they're winning, folks. Because we're not verbal. We're not out there. We're not in your face. We're not like crazy about it all. So they're winning from that standpoint. Now, I will tell you, they're well funded. They're extremely well funded. Because one of the reasons they're well funded is it's probably going to be the largest cash crop there is. So if you were commodity dealers, wouldn't you put your money into some of those campaigns? But then you perceive it over here, you don't see who's pumping that money in. You don't see who's pushing that message. But think about it. We need to drive those discussions about public policy and the community. But it's only strength in numbers.
Okay, so it says focus on policies, which is what Peggy was saying about public policy, public opinion, what we're discussing, but really, where's this discussion coming from? Is there another party that's kind of driving a certain push towards a certain side of that policy? It says policies shape behavior. The school environment shapes behavior. After all, if you're at work and your child is in school for 6 to 8 hours, I mean, you're talking about almost 50% of the waking day of the child, you know, and your school is your partner in raising that child, you know. So really going in and coming up with a collaborative experience with your educator, with your school system is huge, you know.
Right.
Like Peggy said, it's not coming in and telling them, hey, you're doing it wrong, because then it becomes me versus you.
Right.
But if you go in with this non-judgmental perspective, listening, well, why is it that you do it like this? What's your position and what's your goal? And then you communicate, I like that idea, I like that goal. Let me tell you about my goals as well. And then maybe we can set up a common ground where we can both decide on similar goals that we can drive towards together.
I'd like that last one, engage your children in the process. That's exactly what you did in the Truth campaign.
Well, yeah, but I also think, you know, when you focus on policies, you know, the environment that the policies really control is really only half the equation, because the other half of the equation is your kid and the decisions they're going to make in that environment. So you have to make those things come into alignment.
Okay, with that.
Yeah, I think what you were saying about engaging your children, you know, in the example that we were stating about a parent going to a school and engaging, we were missing that child in that example. There's stakeholders in every process. And the stakeholder is you as a parent, the teacher, the principal, and your child, because this is their life as well. And if you don't get buy-in from the child, if you don't listen to the child and where they want to go, then they won't be on board with whatever plan you put together with the school.
That sounds like Red Ribbon Certified Schools. That's what we do with Red Ribbon Certified Schools. Okay, I'm getting this back, that we need to move on. Encourage media literacy and closely monitor screen time. Number 8. Do you want me to do 8?
Boom.
There you go.
Involve other parents or strengthen numbers. Talk to your children's friends' parents. Form parent peer groups. Again, we keep repeating the same thing. Decide on your boundaries, set them, discuss them, let everyone know. I thank you so much, Richard. Thank you so much, Markham, for being